Hi, my name is Sarah Inman, and I am a new PhD student. I actually start today at the University of Washington in Seattle. So today I'm going to show you a little bit about why we're doing this discourse mapping project in your class. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is listed below. It's sinman@stevens.edu. I will also be in your class on Monday, October 3rd from 7:45 to 8:45. So we can go through the practice assignment together, and then you can also ask me any questions that you might have. So the title of this talk is Organizational Accidents and Dialogic Interaction. I'm not actually going to tell you anything about organizational accidents because you already know this, but I'll tell you a little bit about why we're doing this project this way. So the challenge is, how might we reflect on our own arguments, and how do you know if an idea is a good idea? So the problem with a lot of forums and other online discussion venues is that the only place for review is a thumbs up, thumbs down response. So there's very little critical thinking involved. In recent years, technologists have completely transformed how we interact with one another, how we argue, how we collect information. As a result, I think we should be changing the way we teach argumentation, and that's not just what we teach, but how we teach it. So these tools really revolutionize the way in which we make discussions online and the way in which we think about our discussions online. So given what you're learning about some of these major organizational accidents, we're more interested in figuring out a way to discuss this in an enriching way. And hopefully these tools are things that would be used to prevent these sort of accidents, or at least make visually explicit what is being discussed. So here are just a few of the current online discussion tools that people use. Quora, Reddit, Stack Overflow, Facebook, anything that has the commenting option could be considered online discussion. You see this with any sort of news outlet. YouTube has this. And it's not really a great way of making visually explicit different lines of thinking. So how does this discussion online affect your thinking? And I want you to really think about that throughout this process. It's important in understanding why we disagree to help reach a consensus. So the idea behind mapping your discourse, or mapping the way that you think, is to examine the uncertainty by illuminating certain contradictions. And the hope is that by having you perform these reflective assessments about your judgments as well as others, you can bring those contradictions forth. So a framework for thinking about this is called IBIS. It stands for Issue-Based Information System. And the basic structure of IBIS is a graph, so it's therefore quite suitable to be manipulated by a computer. This data model is more involved than just your question answer, such as when you answer multiple choice or fill in the blank. IBIS structures conversational data with metadata, such as specifying ideas or comments that support or challenge your response. So this adds a layer of evidence to your support or your opposition. So here you can see a map of what is IBIS, and this is actually created in Compendium, which I'll say a few more words about in a second, but you can see here it says what is IBIS, so we get the history, but then also the idea, a notation to document viewpoints on issues and arguments for or against them. So then we have these arguments for or against, so enables capture of diverse viewpoints, serves as an organizational memory, makes reasoning transparent. Some of the negatives, or atomizes discussion, chronological sequence of conversation is lost. And then the question is, what is it good for? It's good for dialogue mapping and issue mapping. And then there's a little history on it. So Compendium is an example of a tool that's built based on the IBIS structure. This is a hypermedia tool for collaborative mapping. It extends Rattel's issue-based information system structure from its original vision of supporting discussion about wicked problems to support for collective sense-making more broadly. So Compendium's hypertext functionality is a critical addition to the issue-based notation that was derived from IBIS. It also has a Java-based open architecture that enables it for interoperability with other databases. And this is an image from a paper by Simon Buckingham-Shum, who has done a lot of work in this area. I also know Professor Ayandoli has done a good bit of work with Compendium and other discourse mapping tools. Okay, so I'll tell you a bit about my own research. So this is a model of reflective sense-making. We used Bayesian Lab, which is a Bayesian network analysis software, to map these inputs. And I just want to take a moment to explain what I mean by sense-making. Sense-making is used to describe a lot of different things because it's such an ambiguous term. It's defined by Carl Wake. I never can pronounce his name. It's spelled Weick. And sense-making was used to describe the negotiation and creation of meaning. He has some heuristics for thinking about it. So sense-making is a matter of identity. So it's who we understand ourselves to be in relation to the world. And that it's also retrospective. So we shape experience into meaningful patterns according to our own memory of experience. And this ties in well with the cognitive load theory as well, which I'll go over in a bit. But it also has to do with socialization. So it's where we grew up in the world, how we were taught to be in the world, and the people with whom we're currently interacting. So as you can see, sense making is a process. And the idea behind reflective sense making is that by reflecting on your learning, this is how you can make sense of new knowledge and tie it into your prior knowledge. Okay, so the model here was based on the research we did at Georgetown, and we were provided access to the backend SQL database. So we were able to look at all of these activities from our users. And as you can see, our key components to equal deep learning were exploration, identification, processing, judgment, and integration. I'm not going to go over all of these. These were based on different things that the user did. So searches done for peer-added ideas, bookmarks, the way that they rated them. And then we also looked at the connections that they made. So we had them explore the concept network. We had them look at overall what struck them as surprising about the concept network. They were asked to look at the cluster of connections. And then they also were asked to connect with their peers. So this was an opportunity to provide justification for their either disagreement or agreement with the argument that their peers made. We did this in a bioethics course, and the focus was on having students map their judgments on a moral issue. So the issue was if Adderall was morally just or not to use to complete a test or to study for a test. And then they had to use a philosophical framework for justifying their decision of yes or no. So they had deontological, virtue ethics, and utilitarianism. And so what they did after they mapped to the philosophical justification, they were asked to map to their peers who came to the same conclusion but used a different justification. And then they were also asked to map to those who came to a different conclusion but used the same justification. So what it produced was a very interesting visualization, but what we found by doing interviews with students in a focus group was that the interface and the complexity of the concept network visualizations undermined the level of interaction that students had with the tool and therefore with the discussion itself. And we did this in graduate and undergraduate classes. So initially we chose Cohere because it was more visual than the other linear interfaces. However, as we see, the visualizations were too complex. And this is an image of the discourse visualization. This image is really bad for many reasons, but the quality of it is bad. And Cohere no longer exists, so I'm not able to go in and recreate this. So, but as you can see, that the concept network was pretty hard to make sense of, even if the image was clear. And so this refuted a few of our hypotheses. One of the things that we found in making design recommendation was that cognitive load theory played a huge role in our findings. So there are three categories in cognitive load theory: intrinsic, extraneous, and germane. Intrinsic cognitive load varies depending on the complexity of the material to be learned and the learner's prior knowledge in relation to the new material. So within the context of solving ill-structured problems, intrinsic load tends to be high due to the complexity and novelty of the learning. Therefore, decreasing the extraneous cognitive load that stems from the organization and sequence of the instructional tasks should be the priority. We found that within the context of ill-structured problems, we can assume that intrinsic load will be high, and therefore what we expect from a good instructional design intervention is for extraneous load to be reduced. Just a note about germane cognitive load, since I didn't really talk about it, is that it's the use of available working memory for the construction of relevant knowledge. But the two main ones that we dealt with were intrinsic and extraneous. So this really leads into debate graph. I chose debate graph for this assignment because it allows for a linear view. And I'll show you what it looks like. As you can see here, there's a linear view with an outline. And this is a good introduction to the world of argumentation visualization because it's not so foreign. So you've seen outlines like this. I'm sure if you've written papers, you've written out an outline prior to writing it. So this is a good way to start. So DebateGraph is a software that combines argument mapping and wiki editing to let people collaboratively map contentious public issues. The idea is that the best arguments on all sides of any debate can be freely available to all and continuously open to challenge and improvement by all. And if anybody watched the debates recently or has been keeping up with the election in the United States, you can probably see that it's not just about convincing your audience, but also to make an actual good argument. So according to Baldwin and Price, who are the developers of DebateGraph, this collaborative visualization tool allows the user to present the strongest case on any debate, openly engage in opposing arguments, create and reshape debates, make new points, rate and filter the arguments, monitor the evolution of debates via RSS feeds, and share and reuse the debates on and offline. Additionally, DebateGraph is open to iterative improvement by anyone who participates, and this is a quote, but it's a global graph of all the debates that enables us to visualize and deepen our understanding of the ways in which different debates are semantically interrelated, and ways in which these interrelated debates shape and are shaped by each other. And then here on the right, you can see there's a community feed. So this is where you can see everyone who's made comments on the map. This is what you'll see once you do the collective map. For the first activity, I think the first two activities actually, you're just going to be doing individual maps. So you don't have to worry about this community feed, but it's interesting if you're exploring the environment. I know Professor Ayandoli sent you some instructions about how to set up an account. So hopefully you had a chance to look around and play with the tool a little. For now, for the rest of the session, I'm going to show you more about DebateGraph. So here's an example of what a map looks like. This is actually DebateGraph's featured map idea, so it has all of the sort of favorite maps here. So I'm actually going to get out of this presentation so I can show you what an actual map looks like if we engage with it. Okay, so first we're going to explore this Global Goals for Sustainable Development map. So you can see here on the right, you can see details about the actual map. This is where you can sort of see this page view. So I'm going to open this in a new tab and we can look at the page view. This looks more like a report. So if you're working on a map with someone else, you can edit this like you would any sort of wiki, and we'll go into the edit so you can see what it looks like. So here you can see you can add images, you can link to different things. This is called the Rich Media Editor. So anytime you've used a blog, you've probably seen this in Canvas, discussion forums, anything like that. This is where you can add interactive content, but you can also link to different things and explain what the map is about. So we'll get out of this. This is also where you can add some citations. And this is useful certainly in the academic setting where you'll be making arguments that you might need to cite your reasoning. Okay, so here we can also navigate to different views. You can do this in any view in DebateGraph. So if I go back to they call this the bubble view, but this is kind of the typical discussion map view, I can change to look at the tree view. And you can zoom out if you need to view the whole map. As you can see, this is quite large, and this map is actually a difficult one to view with the tree structure. So let's look at this one, the global financial crisis, and we'll view this as also at the tree view. So this one's a little bit easier to view this way. So you can see you have long-term causes of the financial crisis, how should the U.S. and other governments respond, immediate triggers of the financial crisis, what is the future of money, and potential consequences of the financial crisis. So we'll click immediate triggers of the financial crisis. And then we have these other options that come up: an agency problem, bubble in the U.S., house pricing, background to the global financial crisis. So as you can see, this little triangle indicates that it links to a different map. So if we select this one, we'll see it's linked to the G20 London Summit. So we're just going to go back. And let's do a different view. So let's look at the radial graph view. So here again, you have a different perspective of looking at it. Let's click on bubble in the US housing. And then here we can see this purple connection indicates a component. So a component to the collapse in housing prices was household debt service ratio rose steeply. And what's nice here is you can actually see the evidence of this claim. So we could actually jump to the page view. And here we can see, okay, let's go back to the bubble in the US housing prices, and we can see more components to that. So here we can see personal savings rate evaporated, demographic changes as baby boomers move to retirement, and so forth. So it's a really quick way of diving into an argument and the justifications for those arguments. So let's look at one of the other views. I find outline view very useful when you're getting started with this process because, like I was mentioning earlier, this looks very much like the outline that you put together when you write a paper. So you can think about it in this sort of linear way that we've been taught to think about arguments. And so you can expand these. You can see, here's a little interesting part. So we've got the human cognitive biases. And then a connection to that are the forms of human cognitive biases. So if we go to that, you can see this connection is connected as an issue right here. And then these are components, or position. So these are forms of human cognitive biases. So we've got availability, heuristic, bandwagon effect, and so forth. So the green indicates a supportive argument, and the pink represents an opposing argument. So as you can see, we'll say as a supporting argument, homeowners saw rising house prices as a natural order. Investors underweighted systemic risk. Lenders were overconfident in their ability to manage risk, and regulators overestimated their powers of insight and response. And then the opposing argument is cognitive biases are constant. So if we want to go to the page view here, we can read more about this. In this map, there's not as much information, so I can show you one that I've done to map my own research. It is this bringing salmon together. And so what I have here are some issues, sociological and economic dimensions of salmon systems, ethnographic investigations, governance and subsistence, and biophysical state of knowledge of salmon distribution and habitat. So if we click one, this is where we can see the actual issues that are related. Here's a map that I made for a political science course last semester, and you can see here we just got started on it, so it's not complete. So if I wanted to add an idea, you can see here I can add an issue, a position, information, protagonist, and a note. So let's add a position. It's kind of what I did here in the income inequality, and I'll show you that in a moment. But go ahead and Control US. Something like this. So you get kind of the point. And then so we add this issue. You can see here it's connected to the broader topic of public policy. Maybe we want to connect it to a certain group. So let's instead we'll go select outline. And here you can actually drag it under one of these. So we'll paste it as still a position. But now it's up under American Enterprise Institute. For instance, here I had income inequality in the United States. Let's put that under Brookings. Still a position. And then here you can see with the income inequality, I had added a supporting and opposing position. The topic is income inequality in the United States. My position is I argue that we should implement a form of progressive taxation to mitigate the drastic income inequality. And so here I have Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century as my support, but then you can see also the opposing argument is James I don't know how to say his name, Pethakokis of the American Enterprise Institute. And so that's just a little example of how one map looks, but this is something that, all the students can participate in. So if you were to get a link to this, you could also add your opinion. So you could potentially support my opposing argument, or you could support my argument. And yeah, so that's a little bit of what it looks like. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what it looks like to actually create a map. So what you're going to do is once you get into the interface, you create an account, you'll go to the bottom and you'll click New Map. And then you're going to give your new map a title. In this instance, it's Dieselgate, because that's the case that we're looking at. And then you can add anything in the summary section. This is optional, and it is what will appear in the page section as well. So you have a limited amount of characters for the heading and for the summary, but then whenever you select the details, you can add as much information as you want. And then what you're going to do is add an idea. So this is where you can add an issue, position, information, protagonist, note. If you're not satisfied with these idea types, you can actually go in to edit the details and change the idea type, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so here we'll add workplace factors, and we can add an argument group. And then we'll click Save. So what you can do is, if you didn't like the element type, you can go into Edit Details, and then you can change element type. And then you can select from this long list of options what you want your new element type to be. So this, for example, the workplace factors could be where. So it could be that the reason for Dieselgate was that so it could be that the building itself was not conducive to collaboration or communication. Or you could say this is a story, and so then you can add your story here. For this assignment, you'll mostly be using issue, position, supportive argument, opposing argument, probably protagonist, and maybe category. But I don't know that you need to use a lot of these others. Example might be an interesting way to relate to other cases that are like this. And so that could be useful too whenever you're mapping. But for your first practice assignment, just keep an open mind about it. You can really get as creative as you want. Play around a little. I think the Mythbuster is an interesting element type, or brainstorming. I use this tool a lot of times just for thinking about my research questions and how I might make those arguments, how I might solve them. So it's a nice brainstorming tool too if you're interested in that. So yeah, just play around, and we will do a practice activity while we're in class together. So hang tight for that. Okay, so then once you do that, you'll click Save, and then you have this connection. Another thing we can do for the who is to blame is we can add the idea, which will be who. So maybe it's an organization. And then we'll click Save. And then here is where we can add why. And so in this example, we can add the level of culpability for this person who is responsible. And then here we go. And you can always go back to your outline view if you start getting lost in the some of the mapped views. This is my favorite, the bubble view, but you can change to whatever view you're most comfortable with.